Winnipeg is going to need some scoring help on the wings, and I know just the place to start looking.
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, we are going to be starting off with talking about wing depth. The Jets need it. The NHL has a lot of free agent wings that I think would really help Winnipeg. And you know what? The Jets are going to have a fair bit of cap space. And if Ehlers does in fact leave the Jets, that makes the urgency to find some legitimate squad help up and down the roster all the more urgent. There's lots of guys out there who might be willing to do the job for the Jets. It's just a matter of making that fit happen. But of course, the Jets might also have to do some things internally, and I also want to talk about whether this is going to be the year of big bad Brad Lambert. There are a lot of questions about him. Not really sure where his game is, especially after this past Moose season. So, gonna be a very interesting year for our young potential star. And then we want to close out with some interesting thoughts on really the radio silence around the Jets, right? As much as I'm going to talk about all of these players and stuff, we still have yet to really hear Winnipeg put together some concrete rumors. Not a lot's leaking out to the press other than the Toews stuff, and that leaves me wondering what the Jets' plan is. But let's talk about wings, right? We all love them. You like to fry them, coat them in buffalo sauce, and you like when they score goals. For the Jets, I think wing depth is a real legitimate concern this year. Last season, we had a pretty good roster, and it accomplished, I think, in a lot of ways more than you would anticipate. You look at the lack of elite scorers past the top couple of lines. You look at how there were inconsistencies later in the season and into the playoffs with some of the scoring depth, and you realize that the Jets just need, real finishing talent up and down this lineup. They've got lots of really great forecheckers, and they've got a coach who likes to, adapt to that system and can actually get some pretty good results out of guys that you might not normally expect. But there's only so much that Arneal and this team are capable of when a lot of players on this team just don't really shoot the puck at an elite level. And I think this is where wing depth and the free agency market really is your first place to shop. I know that in the past I've said free agency is not where the Jets should be shopping, but I really was referring specifically to centers. When it comes to wingers, this is a much more lucrative opportunity for Winnipeg. A lot of good players are going to be hitting free agency this summer, and I think the Jets would be wise to take a flyer on a couple of guys who might be able to offer some real scoring punch despite maybe limited minutes. The first guy I'm kind of looking at, and this one is he's a little on the smaller side. A lot of people will say, well, size is what you need. And not really. I mean, this is a player who's played on the Calgary Flames for almost his entire career and was actually quite good. You're in one of the more physical squads out there, and yet he was still putting up 40-plus point seasons. I am, of course, talking about Breadman, Andrew Mangiapane. Mangiapane had a bit of a tougher cap season this past year. He saw his ice time also really tank, and so I feel like people are maybe overlooking that a bit. Mangiapane is one of those guys who's been really a terrific middle six scorer for almost his entire career. The first couple of seasons, there was some interesting promise. And then for like the last 6 or so years, he's popped off pretty great middle six results. He would easily be one of our top third or even at times second line performers based on his current numbers. Now, he's not going to be putting up like 60-point seasons. I don't think that that's really realistic. But if you look at his past production from the last 3 or 4 years, you've got a 55-point season in there. You have 2 40-plus point seasons. And last year, playing basically just above fourth line minutes at 30 minutes a game, he was getting 28 points, 14 goals, 14 assists. And that's roughly consistent with what we've seen in terms of his production in other seasons. Usually he's good for about 15 or so goals, and he'll get between 20 and 30 assists. So this is a guy who I think would easily be a tertiary player for this Jets team. I'd love to see him alongside a Lowry. I think, Mangiapane has really good forechecking ability. I think he's very crafty. He skates well, and I don't think he'd be that expensive. He had a really down year with the Caps, and I feel like the down year might not be as down of a year as you think. When you look at his scoring rates and what he was doing, I think he still put up pretty fair results. And if you give him maybe a $3.5 million contract for a couple of seasons, I wonder if he'd be willing to come back to Canada, right? You move to the President's Trophy team, you get a fresh start with the Jets. I could see it being a very mutually beneficial thing. And on this team, he'd be a great, not only power play 2 option, but somebody who I think could really boost the 5v5 shooting percentage. If the Jets want to go a little bit more ambitious in a way, you might look at an Andrei Kuzmenko, another former Flame who's been doing pretty good, games and pretty good numbers recently. Now, I will say, with Kuzmenko, his sample size is kind of small, and I feel like there is a modicum of risk with, just how much his scoring ability is going to translate to a team like Winnipeg. He rode a really hot first year with the Canucks to, a pretty sizable contract. And then after that, things were a little topsy-turvy. He had some injuries. Things didn't quite go well. And, he's found himself bouncing between like 3 or 4 different teams the last couple of seasons. With the Kings, though, he popped off. 17 points in 22 games. He was a bona fide stud in their postseason run. And I kind of feel like this is a guy that's maybe on the verge of starting to really put it together. And for a team like Winnipeg, if you're looking for a guy who's a real menace in the slot area and has a great shot, great passing and vision, and is a pretty nice skater, Kuzmenko could be a really intriguing gamble. Again, I think the Jets really need to be taking a look at a lot of options here when it comes to their middle six. The wing scoring depth right now is just kind of average. You look at the center depth, and the center depth will be okay, even if I don't like it. But if you get some real wing help, you might be able to mask some of those bigger issues. If you're starting to take a little bit of a bigger punt, you might look at an Anthony Mantha. Mantha is a guy that I think the Jets have had a lot of time for. And, again, another player who is a Flame right now. I guess we have this weird desire to bring in, wingers from Calgary. But Mantha, if he doesn't get extended, could be a really intriguing fit for Winnipeg. He's big, he's strong, he's got a nice shot, and he's also had a rough couple of years. He's been injured a lot. His cap seasons were kind of mid, generally speaking. Now, he still put up pretty respectable results given some of his deployments and health issues. So if you are going for Mantha, you're probably doing it on a pretty cheap deal. But I don't know what his own desire is. Where does he want to go, right? Will he consider the Jets a place where he might really do some damage? Very big question. But if he is willing to come to Winnipeg, I would say making a free agent offer might be a wise gamble. He's one of those players who, he's got some cosmetic issues, and you do worry a little bit about his availability. But if he is able to stay healthy, he has been a very strong play driver and a pretty good offensive creator with size that I think Arneal would like. The last guy I want to talk about very briefly is a player who has been in Winnipeg before, Michael Eyssimont. Eyssimont, has kind of bounced around a couple of teams recently, the Kraken, the Lightning, the Sharks, and he's been a very solid fourth-line guy for a lot of teams. I think if he were to come to Winnipeg, he would be able to help out in ways that maybe the fourth line just hasn't had a lot of spark and energy with. Now, the fourth line this past season I thought was pretty good, but they still didn't quite have a ton of finishing punch. Eyssimont, I wouldn't say is going to be like an elite scorer, but maybe he can add a little bit more offense and jump to this group, right? And if he's willing to come back to the Jets after, maybe not the happiest separation earlier, new regime, new coaches, maybe there's a chance that he might fit in better this time. I don't know, right? He's going to have a couple of teams that I think might be interested in him, but you see a lot of players like this waived pretty frequently. So it's hard to say if he would be willing to come back to the Jets, but if he is on a super cheap deal, I'd certainly be down to find out. Now, the Jets might also be hoping that some of their players, whether they go for a center role or out wide, start to really percolate and become impact players this coming season. And there's a guy that I've kind of thought about for a while and where he really fits in this org. It is Brad Lambert. Will this be the season of Big Bad Brad? I want to chat about that coming right up. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. And they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller for longer. As a Marylander, I do like the sensation of cracking open. The shelled variety, I think it's a lot like cracking open crabs, and just like a crab, it's got great protein inside. But if you're not like me and you need something really fast, you want something that's quick and easy before you drop your kids off at school or before you hit the gym, they also have a no-shelled variety. They come in some great seasonings and flavors. And of course, Wonderful Pistachios are a complete protein, providing all 9 essential amino acids. So get snackin' and get crackin' with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's show as we're chatting a little bit about whether the Jets can improve internally. Now, I know that we all have seen the NHL lineups for the Jets. We know that their combinations don't tend to change a lot. Not a big shock when you think about how this team is a little rigid. I'm hoping that this season, maybe we start to see some internal changes. I know that that's probably asking for a lot, but you never know. Maybe hope springs eternal. Maybe somebody surprises us. Amidst all of this, we're going to have some rookies fighting for roster spots. And I wonder if this is partly what the Jets are planning for, if they're not really going to be aggressive, either in free agency or on the trade market. Now, I will say, I don't really know if I like this plan so much. If it was last year before we had the President's Cup run, I would have felt differently. You know, last season could have been the year that you really transitioned with some guys. You start to get them up to speed. But the Jets opted to go very veteran heavy. This year, I feel like you kind of have to go veteran heavy. If you are really serious about trying to win the Cup and make a deep playoff run, then you really need to focus on bringing in established talent. But the Jets might not really agree with that. And in fact, it's a little hard to tell what they do or don't really think about this offseason. We've heard them say that they're committed to winning the Cup and really doing all that they can, but we know that actions speak louder than words. And amidst all this, I do wonder about Brad Lambert. Lambert, I think, has probably been shopped to more teams than we know. He might have been on the block in the Brock Nelson deal, not really clear if he's been included in other trade offers. But Lambert has been a little bit of a frustrating gem. And I think it really speaks to, A, how hard it is for a lot of kids to really find success at the pro levels, and B, also speaks to the kind of quirky prospect that he is. Now, when I mentioned Lambert as a potential lineup option for this coming season, I got a lot of pushback. People are like, Lambert sucks and all this crap. And look, I get it, right? He had a bad year this past season. But I think when you start really digging into what happened with him in the Moose, it's really hard to know if it was all his fault or if it was really the surrounding environment. Take for the context that he was third in team scoring. Yeah, Dylan Coughlin went in and probably would have outpaced pretty much everyone on that team if Coughlin had actually had a full season. But I also contest that Coughlin is frankly too good for the AHL. I've kind of said this a lot. I think that he's actually an NHLer, and so I don't really find that as helpful as a comparison. I look at Lambert against a lot of his peers, and I think the biggest thing that you would have wanted to see from Lambert is offensive domination. You didn't really see that. Lambert, I think, tried to do a lot on that team, but you see his shooting percentage having a career low, like 6 or 7%. You saw him, notching a fair few number of assists. He was creating lots of opportunities and getting in on the action, but he wasn't really scoring many goals himself really until the end of the season. And even then, I wouldn't exactly say it was super prolific. And so Lambert kind of makes you wonder what he's going to do for the Jets. And I feel like this has to be the sink or swim season. You need to throw him into the deep end. If he sinks, it's probably time to cut your losses and have him move to another org. I think Lambert is a super talented kid. I really don't doubt that one day he will be an NHLer, but I think the Jets are really needing to find out if it's going to be in Winnipeg colors. If he can't help you now, then you need to find somebody who can. And, obviously Shubrakov will likely have a roster spot this year. I would really not doubt that. I think he's been very good. And in the sample size that we have so far, I've come away very impressed with him. Obviously, scoring a couple of quick NHL goals already in his few games. I thought had he not gotten injured, he'd probably have been called up at some point for the playoff run. But the reality was a little bit different. Things didn't go according to plan. And Lambert's NHL stint, for what it's worth, I thought it looked better towards the second part of his stay with the Jets, but I wouldn't say that he really blew the socks off of anyone either. And so, this coming year is kind of, for me, the make or break season. Now, I do feel like if you take him out of Manitoba and put him on a team that actually has real talent, I think it's going to be a different story. Not to say that Manitoba has lacked, good talent and veteran players and leadership, but the moves were just awful. They were one of the most unwashably bad teams in the whole AHL, and I feel like that probably doesn't help a kid who really thrives on confidence. Lambert is an effortless skater. He's a super creator, and he's also somebody that really has to be confident in what he's seeing. If he doesn't have it, if he doesn't feel like he's really in the best position to succeed, I think it really does impact his game performance. And I don't even think that he was as bad as people make him out to be. Being third in team scoring behind a lot of established AHL veterans doesn't really scream you suck. It seems more like, given the circumstances and what was going on with the Moose, he actually had a pretty productive year. Now, again, I think the bigger question is, can he elevate his game to another level? And, I wouldn't really anticipate him starting for the Jets next season unless he comes into camp and just makes it impossible to turn him away. But my feeling is he probably should start with the Jets. I know it's a risk, I know it's a gamble, but I think Winnipeg really needs to find out if this guy can be a contributor. If he can't, then move him in a deal for somebody who can. That's the only thing that I think you can really do now. You've waited long enough. Putting him for like another Moose season really doesn't feel helpful for anyone. And Lambert at this point is probably looking to really make his mark at this level. If he continues to stay down in the AHL, I can only imagine that that's going to rankle his chains, especially if he's on a team that, frankly, is kind of a dead-end squad. Unless the Moose have a big overhaul this coming summer, I just don't really see them having a particularly great season next year. So this is the time to figure out if Big Bad Brad can finally be a major NHLer. I still have a flame for him, and I think he's one of those players who, if he does leave the Jets, he's going to kill it somewhere. I just feel that he has a lot of untapped potential, and I think the right team and the smart coach will bring it out of him. If that's the Jets, that would really be the most ideal situation. We are potentially losing Ehlers, and Lambert's the only guy internally who has the kind of skill set that Ehlers has. He's got very similar transition skating ability. He's kind of that big puck farrier, and I think he could be a really creative option, even if his offensive production isn't going to be on the same level. I still think that there is a real chance that Lambert becomes a great Jets forward, but the time is running out for him to do that. And if the Jets can't make it happen, then they're going to have to make somebody else happen. And I'm hopeful that they don't wait around to find out until it's too late. They've sometimes done this with prospects in the past. We know that this team drafts, they kind of develop, and then they don't actually bring them up to the NHL. So it's time to change that narrative. It's time to make it Lambert or maybe some other player like Chibrikov part of a really successful class of draft picks. None of those picks really help you if they aren't able to make the league or get traded for other assets. And so I'm really hopeful that this is the year that we finally see Lambert grab life by the horns and seize his NHL role. But curious to know if you think he'll do it this year. Do you really not have confidence in him? Let me know what you're thinking about Big Bad Brad and whether you think this is the Lambeau season that we've all been waiting for, or if you expect him to be gone by the trade deadline. We also want to chat a little bit about, the radio silence around Winnipeg, right? I have been talking about a lot of other teams making moves, but we haven't really heard the Jets linked to much of anything, and any speculation or rumors have generally been pretty quiet. Are the Jets actually planning to do much this offseason, or do they really think the Toews move was it? We'll chat about that in a moment. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for joining us as we are just closing out with some thoughts on, the Jets kind of being in radio silence mode. Now, we've seen some hints that stuff is happening on the back end. Sandberg and Connor are likely to be announced as extensions coming up in the next few weeks. But beyond that, not really hearing that the Jets are super active. There's no trade rumors. We haven't seen them linked to really any UFAs. We've seen maybe like Mike McIntyre speculate a little bit about a Cody Glass signing, which Cody Glass, if he does come to the Jets, I'd be fine with. I think he makes sense as, another Manitoba guy and also a pretty decent middle six option. Somebody who does actually have a little bit of upside. Defensively, pretty responsible. Offensively, I think that's where Glass really has struggled to find his game. But maybe in Winnipeg, Arniel can whisper some sweet nothings and get him to start finding that extra gear. Glass was supposed to have a decent shot and pretty good passing instincts years ago. Maybe there's still something there that the Jets can tease out. But aside from that, right, we haven't really seen anything else. The Luke Evangelista rumor, which might have been just a fan making it up, appears to have evaporated. We're not really seeing the Jets linked to big free agents. No one's expecting us to sign Marner, but I think we'd like to see somebody brought in other than just Toews. Winnipeg, I think, would be making a very big mistake if their primary move is Toews. And right now they seem to be signaling, at least on the surface, that this is what's happening. But if it's not, then, obviously we're in for a big surprise. But I know Mark and a few others have speculated on previous comment sections that the Jets just really aren't that committed to winning. And as much as I would love to really disagree, it's hard to when you see how the Jets run their org and what they really value. Winnipeg's a business first, and I think that continues to be a big deal for this team. I like successful businesses, and I think that that's a great way to ensure that you've got stability, but I also would like the Jets to start winning some stuff beyond regular season awards. They've already conquered the mountain for regular season performances. They've gotten pretty much every single trophy that you can for having an amazing team through 82 games. It's now time to figure out how you turn that into real playoff success. And that's where I sort of wonder what their plan for the summer is. We saw Chipman send out the letter, a couple months ago that they will do everything that they can to win. But I don't know, man. Do we really feel like that's going to happen? I've kind of had my doubts. I really wanted this to be the summer of Chevy. But based on how the Toews signing has gone, what we're hearing about, the Toews contract being a lure for Nikolai Ehlers, and how likely that feels to be a real winning proposition, I just don't think the Jets really see it the same way. I think Winnipeg really doesn't feel a lot of urgency. I think they probably look at the President's Trophy season as a huge success, which it absolutely is. No one will ever take that away and question it. But I think if you look at how they lost in the postseason, it wasn't really an accident what happened. Yeah, there was some puck luck and things that could have gone a little bit better against the Stars, but even if the Jets advanced to the Western Conference Final, I don't really have great feelings about what would have happened against the Oilers. Edmonton only had one particular weakness against the Stars, and it was kind of in net. And even then, it really wasn't enough to sink them. The Stars, frankly, just got outlapped by the Oilers. It was like it wasn't even competitive for much of the series. And so I wonder, a Jets team that struggled against the Blues and had some real tough games against the Stars, would Winnipeg really have fared much better? Maybe, but I think they legitimately need to look at how they lost and come to terms with the fact that they need to improve this roster. You've got a lot of guys who don't really bring enough offense. You've got a lot of really good forecheckers. You've got a pretty strong team structure all around. The 5v5 game is pretty solid. Your power play is great. Your PK has improved to roughly league average. You're likely to get good goaltending again next season. Yet you really need to find a way to add more goal-scoring punch, which is funny for a team that you'd look on paper and you see plenty of goal scoring from last season, but it was a lot from the power play, and it's just not something that I think the Jets should lean on as much. The best teams that make it far in the playoffs are your best 5v5 scoring chance creators, and Winnipeg was not one of those teams. they were a lot closer to the middle of the pack than the rest of the competition. And so I think it's really important for the Jets to really give us something to go on, right? Go for some big names. If you swing and it doesn't work, that's fine with me, right? You don't have to come away with every single acquisition, but you do need to make something legitimately helpful happen. It can't be another season or window where you end up with like a Brandon Tanev and a Luke Shen. Those guys are nice. We appreciate their services. We also know that they're not really the players who really take you over the top into cup contender status, especially when the Jets are far behind other teams. We're not built like a Panthers squad. We don't have the elite, crazy forward talent of an Edmonton. We don't even quite have the same level of depth that the Stars team has had the past couple of seasons. And so I think the Jets really need to, be proactive, get aggressive. I say it every offseason. And in previous years, I think the Jets were a lot more active. That's why the radio silence this year is a little bit just disconcerting, right? I know that we don't have to know that the exact plan or the outline of what's going to happen, but it would be nice to know that the Jets are in on something. Obviously taking care of your internal business, that's very important. Get it done first, great. But also make sure that you're doing some investigation and bringing in some other talent. The Jets can't do this alone. They've got a good foundation to build on, but it's a foundation, right? You've got to add to it. You can't kind of go this middle of the road approach where you take a chance on a 37-year-old center and maybe one or two additional players that are kind of in the margins, but not really anyone who can help you move the needle. The wings I mentioned before kind of necessitate bringing in somebody else to help them as well, right? You can't just bring in a couple of guys and hope for an elite squad to pop out. I think each of those guys are underrated in some capacity and can really help, the depth scoring. But if the Jets are really serious, they got to take a bigger swing somewhere. You've got all the assets to do it. You have all of your trade stuff. The trade deadline really didn't go that well, so make the most of it over the summer and set yourself up for a much better playoff run next season. It's a far away, I know, but the Jets really need to be working to try and improve the squad. If the Jets really don't do a lot this summer, I do wonder what the mood in the room is going to be, because Scheifele, we've seen before when his body language wasn't great. We know that he has feelings about how this team's direction has been, and I wonder if he'll be okay if the Jets really don't add again, and I think Arniel has even expressed a level of disappointment with what happened at the trade deadline. So hopefully, summer of Chevy, we see something special. But give me your predictions for the offseason, and if it's really grim, you're entitled to that. I'm hoping you're wrong. I'm hoping I'm wrong about my own skepticism, but, it is what it is, right? Life goes on, so do the Winnipeg Jets, and our episode tomorrow will probably go into more signings and rumors and hopefully give us some kind of Jets extension news. It's what we're waiting for. We need to hear it, and hopefully we get something later this week. But for tonight's show, that's all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. See you back here tomorrow. So as always, have a great night, and go Jets go.